They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I discovered something even better. Living well while your ex-wife watches from the sidelines. When Alara handed me divorce papers, she expected tears and begging. Instead, I smiled, said, "Fine by me," and disappeared into the woods with a secret that would change everything. What she found when she tracked me down months later, let's just say the cabin wasn't empty, and the woman sharing my table wasn't who anyone expected. My name is Arthur Davies. Folks call me Art. I'm 64 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had my life figured out. Been married to Alara for 41 years. Raised 2 kids who turned out decent enough and built a business that kept food on the table and a roof over our heads. Never was much for fancy things, but we had what we needed. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was sitting at our old oak kitchen table, the same one we bought at a yard sale back when Clint was president, drinking my black coffee and reading the sports section. Alara walked in wearing that blue cardigan I'd bought her last Christmas, the one she said made her look frumpy. She poured herself tea, which should have been my first clue since she'd been a coffee drinker for decades. She sat down across from me, folded her hands like she was about to pray, and looked me dead in the eye. "Art," Alara said, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "I'm done. I want a divorce. Now, I've been around long enough to know when someone's rehearsed their lines. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was calculated, planned, probably discussed with her book club friends over wine and cheese. I set down my newspaper, took a long sip of coffee, and nodded. "Fine by me," I said. The look on her face was worth $1 million. She'd come armed for war, ready for tears and pleading, and maybe some good old-fashioned begging. Instead, I gave her the same response I'd give if she'd asked me to pick up milk on the way home. Alara blinked hard like someone had just switched on a bright light in a dark room. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope thick with papers. "I've had everything prepared," she said, sliding it across the table. "The division of assets, the house, your business accounts. I think you'll find it fair." I picked up the envelope, hefted its weight, and set it back down without opening it. "I'm sure you do," I said. "Always were good with numbers." She stood up then, smoothing down her skirt like she was heading to a job interview instead of ending a marriage. "That's it?" Alara asked. "No questions, no fight." I stood too, rinsed my coffee mug in the sink, and dried it with a dish towel hanging on the oven handle. "What's to fight about, Elle? You made your choice. I'm respecting it." The way her mouth opened and closed reminded me of a fish gasping for air. She'd expected drama, needed it maybe to justify what she was about to do. Instead, I gave her exactly what she'd asked for, freedom. 3 hours after Alara walked out that morning, I was still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at that envelope like it might grow legs and walk away. The coffee had gone cold, but I didn't bother making a fresh pot. Seemed pointless to start new routines when everything else was ending. Around noon, my phone started buzzing. First, it was Charlotte, my daughter. "Dad, Mom called me," Charlotte said without even saying hello. She told me what happened. "Are you okay?" I could hear the kids in the background, my grandkids, 7 and 9 years old, arguing over something trivial the way kids do. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I told her. "Just working through some paperwork." "Dad, you don't have to pretend with me. This is huge. 41 years of marriage doesn't just end over breakfast." She was right, of course. But what was I supposed to tell her? That I'd seen this coming for months? That her mother had been pulling away bit by bit, like someone slowly backing out of a parking space? Sometimes things run their course, Lottie. Like an old engine that's finally worn out. 20 minutes later, Felix called. My son, 38 years old, and still thinks he can fix everything with the right words. "Dad, what the hell happened?" Mom's at my house crying into a box of tissues, saying, "You didn't even fight for the marriage." I walked out to the garage where my old Chevy pickup sat waiting for its next oil change. 40 years I've been working on engines, and they made sense. You could diagnose problems, replace worn parts, get things running smooth again. Marriages weren't so simple. Your mother made her choice, son. Wasn't my place to argue with it. But Dad, don't you care? Don't you want to try counseling or something? I ran my hand along the truck's fender, feeling the small dents and scratches that told stories of 4 decades of honest work. Felix, when a foundation shifts, you can shore it up temporarily, but eventually the whole structure is compromised. Your mother and we've been on shaky ground for years. There was silence on the other end. My boy was a software engineer, dealing in logic and code. This kind of human messiness didn't compute for him. I just don't understand how you can be so calm about this, Felix said finally. Because fighting won't change anything, and dignity matters more than drama. After I hung up, I opened that envelope. Alara had been thorough. I'll give her that. She calculated everything down to the last euro. The house would be sold. Proceeds split 50/50ths. My business accounts, my tools, even my fishing gear, all itemized like a warehouse inventory. But there was something she'd missed. Something that made me smile for the first time that day. Buried in all those legal papers was a clause about undisclosed assets. Alara had always handled our finances, managed our investments, balanced the checkbooks. What she didn't know was that I've been quietly setting aside money for years, just in case. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I called in sick to my own business. Well, not exactly sick, but I told Gareth, my shop foreman, that he was running things for the day. Gareth had been with me for 15 years. Knew every bolt and gasket in that place better than some men know their own wives. You feeling all right, Art? Gareth asked. You sound different. Just need to take care of some personal business, I told him. Think you can handle Mrs. Patterson's transmission without burning the place down? Gareth laughed. I'll try to keep the explosions to a minimum. After hanging up, I walked through the house one more time. Alara had been thorough in her planning. She'd already moved most of her personal things to her sister's place over the past few weeks. I just hadn't been paying attention. The closet was half empty. The bathroom counter cleared of her perfume bottles and face creams. I loaded my pickup with everything that mattered to me. My toolbox, a duffel bag with clothes, my fishing gear, and a cardboard box with photos of the kids and my late father. The rest of it, the furniture, the decorative nonsense, the kitchen gadgets we never used. None of it meant anything without her there to fuss over it. My first stop was the bank. I've been thinking about that hidden account all night. The one Alara didn't know about. Turned out old Alistair Hughes, who taught me the auto repair business 40 years ago, had given me more than just trade skills. He taught me that a man should always have walking around money, funds that nobody else knew about, not even family. Just in case life throws you a curveball, Alistair used to say. And trust me, boy, life's got a wicked fastball and no qualms about hitting you right between the eyes. The balance in that account was enough to start over somewhere else. Not rich man money, but enough for a down payment on a small place and living expenses for a couple years. I'd been adding to it slowly, 20 or 30 at a time from cash jobs at the shop. My next stop was Riverside Realty. I'd seen the for sale signs around town for months, but one particular property had caught my eye. A small cabin about 15 miles outside town, right on Miller's Creek. The listing said it needed work, which was fine by me. I'd spent my whole life fixing things that other people had given up on. Jennifer Walsh, the real estate agent, was surprised to see me. Art Davies, Jennifer said, shaking my hand. Haven't seen you since you fixed my husband's truck last spring. What brings you in? Looking to buy that cabin on Miller's Creek. The one that's been sitting empty for 6 months. Her eyebrows went up. That's quite a change from your place in town. Everything okay with you and Alara? Small towns don't keep secrets very long. By evening, everyone would know about the divorce anyway. Sometimes a man needs a fresh start, I said. How soon can we look at it? The cabin was everything the listing had promised and nothing I'd expected. Jennifer wasn't kidding when she said it needed work. The front porch sagged like a tired old man's shoulders, and the roof had more patches than a quilt, but it sat on 3 acres of good land with a clear view of Miller's Creek, and the bones of the structure were solid. Previous owner was a widower, Jennifer explained as we walked through the small living room. After his wife passed, he just couldn't keep up with the maintenance. Family wants to sell it as is. The place had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen that looked like something from the 1970s. But the living room had a stone fireplace that would throw good heat, and the master bedroom had windows facing east toward the creek. I could already picture myself drinking coffee there in the mornings, watching the sun come up over the water. "What's your bottom line?" I asked Jennifer. She named a price that was $30,000 less than what I had in that secret account. "I'll take it," I said. "Cash offer. No inspections needed." Jennifer stared at me like I just spoke in Chinese. "Art, you might want to think about this. Have a contractor look at the foundation, check the electrical, make sure the well water's clean." "Jennifer, I've been fixing things my whole life. I know what I'm looking at." The paperwork took 2 hours. Jennifer kept asking if I wanted to call Alara, make sure she was okay with the purchase. I told her Alara was no longer part of the decision-making process. By sunset, I was the owner of a rundown cabin that most people would have torn down for the land value. But standing on that sagging porch, looking out at the creek with a beer in my hand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Felix. "Dad, Mom's telling everyone you lost your mind and bought some shack in the woods. Please tell me that's not true." I typed back, "It's true, and it's the smartest thing I've done in 20 years. Then I turned off the phone and listened to the creek flowing past my property. Tomorrow I'd start fixing this place up, making it mine. Tonight, I was just going to sit here and remember what it felt like to make decisions without asking permission. The silence was broken by the sound of a truck coming up the gravel drive. I figured it was probably Jennifer coming back to double-check that I hadn't suffered some kind of mental breakdown. Instead, it was an old Ford pickup, older than mine, with a woman behind the wheel. She parked beside my truck and climbed out, tall, lean, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt like she actually used them for work. "You the new owner?" she asked, walking up to the porch. "Arthur Davies," I said, standing up and extending my hand. "Saskia Brandt," she said, giving me a firm handshake. "I live about a mile upstream. Wanted to introduce myself and welcome you to the neighborhood." Saskia Brandt turned out to be the kind of neighbor I'd forgotten existed. The type who showed up with practical help instead of empty pleasantries. The morning after I moved into the cabin, she appeared at my door with a thermos of coffee and a toolbox. "Figured you might need an extra pair of hands," Saskia said, setting the thermos on my makeshift kitchen counter. "That front porch isn't going to fix itself." I'd spent the night on an air mattress, listening to the creek and making mental notes about everything that needed attention. The porch was definitely priority number one. It wouldn't hold weight much longer. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I can handle it." "I'm sure you can, but 4 hands work faster than 2, and I've got nothing pressing today." She wasn't kidding about knowing her way around tools. While I measured and marked the support beams that needed replacing, Saskia started pulling up the rotten decking boards with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of practice. "You do this kind of work professionally?" I asked, impressed by her technique. "Retired Air Force," Saskia said, prying up another board. "Spent 25 years maintaining aircraft. Buildings aren't much different. Keep the structure sound, and everything else falls into place." We worked in comfortable silence for most of the morning. No small talk, no personal questions, just 2 people focused on getting a job done right. By lunch, we'd replaced half the porch decking and reinforced the support posts. "There's a diner in town that makes decent burgers," Saskia said, wiping sawdust off her hands. "My treat since you provided the entertainment." Over lunch, I learned that Saskia had bought her place 3 years ago after retiring from the military. She'd been married once, briefly, to another airman who couldn't handle being married to a woman who outranked him. "Some men can't get past their ego," Saskia said, sipping her iced tea. "They want a woman who needs them, not one who could take care of herself." "Sounds familiar," I said, thinking about Alara's complaints over the years. I was too set in my ways, too independent, too comfortable with silence. "What about you?" Saskia asked. "Divorce, I'm guessing, since you're starting fresh out here." 41 years, I said. She decided she wanted something different. Saskia nodded like she understood completely. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a person is having someone else make the hard decision for them. That afternoon, we finished the porch. As the sun was setting, Saskia gathered her tools and headed for her truck. "Same time tomorrow," she asked. That kitchen window frame needs attention before winter. You don't have to keep helping, I said. I know I don't have to. I want to. After she left, I sat on my newly repaired porch with a beer, watching the creek flow past. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what had gone wrong with my marriage. I was thinking about what might go right, and whatever came next. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when it involves someone people thought they knew. By the end of my first week at the cabin, Alara had apparently heard about my lady friend from at least 3 different sources. She called me on a Thursday evening while I was replacing the kitchen faucet. Art, people are saying you're living with some woman out there. Alara said without even saying hello. People say a lot of things, Elle. Doesn't make them true. So you're not seeing anyone? I sat down my wrench and looked out the window at Saskia's truck parked in my driveway. She was inside making dinner. Nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and tomato soup. While I finished the plumbing, I'm seeing whoever I want to see, I said. That's generally what happens when you get divorced. We're not divorced yet. The papers haven't been finalized. Semantics. You want out, you got out. What I do now isn't your concern. There was silence on the other end. Then the sound of Alara crying. Not the angry tears she used to shed during our arguments, but something softer, more broken. I didn't think you'd move on so fast, Alara said. 41 years should count for something. It does count. It counts as 41 years of trying to be someone I'm not. After I hung up, I found Saskia setting plates on my small dining table. She'd heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. Ex-wife? Saskia asked. Soon to be. She's having second thoughts about whether I should be allowed to have a life after her. That's not how divorce works, Saskia said, handing me a sandwich. She doesn't get to keep you on a shelf for emergencies. The next morning, Felix showed up unannounced. I was outside splitting firewood when his BMW pulled into the driveway, looking as out of place as a tuxedo at a barbecue. Dad, we need to talk, Felix said, climbing out of his car and looking around like he'd landed on an alien planet. Help yourself to coffee, I said, sinking the axe into another log. I'll be done here in a few minutes. I'm serious, Dad. Mom called me last night crying. She says, you're living with some stranger and acting like your marriage never happened. I set down the axe and looked at my son, 38 years old, successful, well-meaning, but still thinking like someone who'd never had his heart broken. Your mother filed for divorce, Felix. She ended the marriage, not me. But Dad, don't you think you're moving a little fast? It's only been a month. Son, your mother and I stopped being married emotionally years ago. The paperwork just made it official. Felix looked frustrated, like he was trying to solve a math problem with missing variables. What about counseling? What about trying to work things out? What about accepting that sometimes things end, and that's not always a tragedy? Before Felix could answer, Saskia's truck pulled into the driveway. She parked beside his BMW and got out carrying a bag of groceries and wearing her usual work clothes. Morning, Art, Saskia said, then nodded politely to Felix. You must be one of the kids. I'm Saskia. Felix shook her hand automatically, but I could see him taking inventory, her confident handshake, her direct eye contact, the way she carried herself like someone who'd never needed anyone's permission to exist. Nice to meet you, Felix said, though his tone suggested otherwise. After Saskia went inside, Felix turned to me with a mixture of confusion and concern. Dad, she seems different from Mom. That's the point, son. 2 months into my new life at the cabin, Alara decided to pay me an unannounced visit. I was replacing the kitchen window when her silver Lexus came crunching up the gravel drive. Through the new glass, I watched her park and sit in the car for a full minute, probably working up the nerve to knock. Saskia was at the stove making her famous chili for dinner. We'd fallen into an easy routine. She'd come over after a morning run. We'd work on whatever project needed attention, and she'd usually stay for dinner. Nothing had been officially discussed, but her overnight bag had been showing up more frequently. Expecting company? Saskia asked, glancing out the window. Ex-wife? I said, setting down my tools. This should be interesting. Alara finally got out of the car wearing a blue dress I bought her for our anniversary 3 years ago. She walked to the front door like she was approaching a firing squad. I opened the door before she could knock. "Alara," I said. "Didn't know you were coming by." "I tried calling," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You didn't answer." "Been busy. What can I do for you?" She looked past me into the cabin, taking in the renovated interior, the warm lighting, the smell of dinner cooking. Her gaze stopped on Saskia, who was stirring the chili and pretending not to listen. "Could we talk privately?" Alara asked. "This is my home," I said. "Saskia is welcome to hear whatever you've got to say." Alara's jaw tightened. "Fine. I came to tell you that I've been thinking about the situation. Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we should try counseling." I leaned against the door frame, studying the woman I'd been married to for 41 years. She looked smaller somehow, less certain than the woman who'd handed me divorce papers 2 months ago. "What changed your mind?" I asked. "I miss you," Alara said, her voice breaking slightly. "I miss us. The house feels empty without you." The house felt empty with me, too. That was the problem. Saskia turned from the stove, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I'll give you two some privacy," she said, moving toward the door. "Stay," I said, not taking my eyes off Alara. "This won't take long." Alara's face flushed red. "Art, I'm trying to save our marriage here. The least you could do is hear me out. I heard you out 2 months ago when you filed for divorce. You made your choice. People can change their minds. Some can, some can't." Alara looked around the cabin again, at the stone fireplace I'd repaired, the new kitchen counters I'd installed, the dining table where Saskia had set 2 place settings for dinner. "This isn't you, Art," Alara said, "living in some shack in the woods, playing house with a stranger. This isn't who you are." "You're right," I said. "This is who I am when nobody's telling me who I should be." Alara started crying then. Not the angry tears from our old arguments, but something desperate and broken. 41 years has to count for something. It does count. It counts as 41 years of learning that we want different things. After Alara left, I found Saskia on the back deck looking out at the creek. She'd heard everything, of course. "You okay?" I asked. "Should I be worried?" Saskia asked about her trying to win you back. I sat down beside her on the steps I'd built the week before. "There's nothing to win back," I said. "That man she was married to doesn't exist anymore." The chest pain started on a Tuesday morning while I was splitting firewood. At first, I thought it was just a pulled muscle. I wasn't 20 anymore, and swinging an axe for 2 hours straight was bound to catch up with me. But when the pain didn't ease up after lunch, and when I started feeling dizzy while fixing the cabin's gutters, I knew something was wrong. Saskia found me sitting on the front steps, breathing hard and sweating despite the cool October air. "What's wrong?" she asked, dropping her toolbox and kneeling beside me. "Probably nothing," I said. "Just got winded." "Art, your color is old concrete. We're going to the hospital." I wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes told me it wasn't up for debate. 25 years in the Air Force had taught her to recognize when someone was in real trouble. The emergency room doctor was younger than my son, Felix, but he knew his business. After an EKG, blood work, and a chest x-ray, he sat down with a serious expression. "Mr. Davies, you've had what we call a minor cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but your heart is definitely sending you a message." "What kind of message?" Saskia asked. She'd insisted on staying with me through all the tests. "The kind that says slow down before something worse happens," the doctor said. "Your cholesterol is through the roof. Your blood pressure is elevated, and there's evidence of arterial blockage. How long has it been since your last physical?" I couldn't remember. Alara used to nag me about doctor visits, but after she stopped caring about my health, I'd stopped thinking about it, too. "We need to run more tests," the doctor said. "Stress test, echocardiogram, probably a cardiac catheterization, and you'll need to make some lifestyle changes immediately." They kept me overnight for observation. Saskia stayed in the chair beside my bed, even though I told her she didn't have to. "Where else would I be?" she asked. The next morning, Felix and Charlotte both showed up looking worried and guilty. Apparently, Saskia had called them after the doctor's initial diagnosis. "Dad, why didn't you tell us you weren't feeling well?" Charlotte asked, taking my hand. "Didn't want to worry anyone," I said. "Besides, I feel fine now." You feel fine because you're on medication, Felix said. The doctor says you could have died if Saskia hadn't brought you in. I looked at Saskia, who was sitting quietly in the corner. She'd saved my life, probably. And all I've been thinking about was how embarrassing it was to be seen as weak. Thank you, I said to her. Don't thank me yet, Saskia said. Wait until you see what I'm going to put you through to keep you healthy. Later that afternoon, while Felix and Charlotte were talking to the doctor about my discharge instructions, I asked Saskia something that had been bothering me. Why are you here? I said, we've known each other 2 months. You don't owe me anything. Saskia was quiet for a long moment, looking out the hospital window at the parking lot below. 28 years ago, I was married to a pilot named Jack Mitchell, she said. Good man, decorated veteran. Never met a problem he couldn't solve by himself. One day he started having chest pains. Told me it was nothing. Probably just stress from his deployment schedule. 3 weeks later, he had a massive heart attack in the cockpit of an F-16. Died instantly. She turned to look at me, her eyes fierce and determined. I'm here because I'm not going through that again. Not if I can help it. Recovery from a heart scare changes a man's priorities real quick. The cardiologist put me on a strict regimen. Medication twice daily, low sodium diet, 30 minutes of walking every morning, and stress reduction techniques that sounded like something Alara would have suggested years ago. Saskia took charge of my recovery like a drill sergeant with a medical degree. She threw out every processed food in my kitchen, stocked the refrigerator with vegetables I couldn't pronounce, and bought a blood pressure monitor that she used on me twice daily. This isn't negotiable, she said when I complained about the bland chicken breast she prepared for dinner. You want to live long enough to enjoy this place. You eat what's good for you. 3 weeks into my new routine, Felix brought his family to visit the cabin. My grandkids, Clara and Hugo, ran around the property like puppies let off a leash, fishing in the creek and building forts in the woods. Watching them explore, I realized this was what I've been missing all those years in town. Space to breathe, room to think, permission to just exist. Dad, you look better than you have in years, Charlotte said, helping Saskia prepare lunch. I was worried when Mom told us about the divorce. But this place suits you. Your father's always been happiest when he's working with his hands, Saskia said, seasoning the grilled fish we'd caught that morning. He just needed room to remember who he is. That evening, after the family had gone home, I sat on the deck with Saskia, watching the creek flow past our property. Yes, our property. Somewhere between the heart attack and the recovery, she'd stopped going home to her place upstream. Saskia, I said, I need to tell you something. She looked at me with concern. Your chest isn't hurting again, is it? No, nothing like that. I need to tell you about Alistair Hughes, the man who taught me the auto repair business. He gave me advice once that I never forgot. What kind of advice? He said, a man should always have walking around money. But more importantly, he should know when he's found something worth staying for. Saskia smiled, the kind of smile that reaches all the way to your eyes. And have you found something worth staying for? I took her hand, feeling the calluses from years of honest work, the strength that had probably saved my life. I found someone worth changing for, I said. Worth being healthier for, worth being better for. 6 months later, Saskia moved in permanently. We sold her place upstream and used the money to add a workshop where I could do small engine repair for the locals. The business wasn't about making money. My pension and the settlement from Alara kept us comfortable. It was about having purpose, staying busy, keeping my hands occupied with useful work. Alara remarried a year later to a retired insurance salesman who appreciated her organizational skills and didn't mind being managed. Felix told me they seemed happy together, which was fine by me. Everyone deserves to find their fit. 2 years after moving to the cabin, I got a call that changed everything. It was from a lawyer in Denver telling me that Alistair Hughes had passed away and left me something in his will. Alistair had been like a father to me after my own dad died young. He taught me everything about fixing engines, running a business, and treating customers with respect. What I didn't know was that he'd been watching my life from a distance, keeping track of how things turned out. Mr. Davies, the lawyer said, Mr. Hughes left you his entire estate. His house, his savings, and his classic car collection. He said you were the son he never had. The inheritance was substantial, enough to secure our future completely and leave something meaningful for my grandchildren. But more than the money, it was Alistair's letter that got to me. Art, the letter read, "If you're reading this, it means you finally figured out what I tried to teach you 40 years ago. A man's worth isn't measured by what he accumulates, but by what he's willing to walk away from when it's not serving him anymore. I heard about your divorce and your new life. Proud of you for finally putting yourself first." Saskia found me sitting on the deck that evening, reading Alistair's letter for the third time. "Everything okay?" she asked, settling into the chair beside me. "More than okay," I said, handing her the letter. "It's like he's giving me permission to be happy." "You didn't need his permission for that." "Maybe not, but it helps to know someone was paying attention." That fall, Felix brought troubling news. His marriage was falling apart, and he was struggling with the same issues I'd faced, feeling trapped, unappreciated, slowly dying inside a relationship that had stopped being a partnership. "What should I do, Dad?" he asked during one of his weekend visits. I thought about Alistair's advice, about walking away money, about knowing when you found something worth staying for. "Son, only you can answer that. But I'll tell you what I learned. Life's too short to spend it pretending to be someone you're not." 6 months later, Felix filed for divorce. It was messy and expensive, but he came through it with his dignity intact and a clearer sense of what he wanted from life. The grandkids visit every other weekend now. Clara is learning to fish, and Hugo is already talking about building his own cabin someday. Saskia teaches them practical skills. How to change a tire, how to read a map, how to start a fire without matches. "Why do we need to know this stuff?" Clara asked during her last visit. "Because self-reliance is the foundation of freedom," Saskia told her. "You can't control what life throws at you, but you can control how prepared you are to handle it." Looking back, I realized that Alara filing for divorce was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because our marriage was terrible, but because it forced me to become the man I was meant to be instead of the man I thought I was supposed to be. Some people spend their whole lives trying to fix what's broken. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is walk away and build something new. Alistair knew that. Saskia knows that. And finally, at 66 years old, so do I.